Everybody, good evening and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to take a minute and let everybody in the course of the next couple minutes. Just see if the room is filling up. Give me 1 second here. All right, we have a tiny little poll. It's 2 questions. Are you a parent, student, educator? And if you are a parent, guardian, student, what grade are you in or is your child in? Super fast, and there'll be a question at the very end if you want any kind of follow-up after this talk. But yeah, we keep the polls pretty short and sweet. Just two and a couple questions. All right, so like the room is still filling in. Give it another 15, 20 seconds, and then we'll start talking about how to help your kid manage anxiety. Something that many of us feel on a more regular basis in recent days and recent years. There are definitely many sources and many causes of anxiety, and academics are just one of them. Some people it's the environment, some people it's AI, some people it's politics, some people it's the CDC, some people there's always something to, that can get your attention and can cause anxiety, so fears of the future. And part of it, learning how to regulate your anxiety is a skill that students need, is a skill that adults need. And sometimes by learning how to regulate our own anxiety, we can help our kids manage theirs as well, or help our parents manage theirs as well. If you're trying to work on both the up and down, which sometimes I find myself doing that. But happy to be here tonight. We're going to have a talk about anxiety. There'll be some strategies. There'll be a little bit of discussion of how it shows up for kids. And then we'll have some Q&A at the end. But the deck, we're going to share the deck. We're going to share the presentation. We're going to record it right now. And within a day or so, we'll send you a recording. It'll be durable. You'll be able to watch it, share it with your partners, with your children, with friends. And hopefully you'll find this valuable enough to watch it or go back to a section. All right, that is it. And my background is counseling. My background is the psychology of education, how students learn. And I spent a few years helping kids, working with students. And anxiety was part and parcel of the work. Additionally, with all my work with testing and helping kids with academic work, anxiety is part of the work, especially when it comes to high stakes things like testing, but also performance academically, getting into college. And post-pandemic, there's more anxiety. And with if you believe Jonathan Haidt's ideas about technology and screens with social media, that there is more anxiety now than there was 20 years ago, partially because of all of our engagement online and all the performance culture. And I'll talk about that tonight as well. All right, let's jump in. Let's do it. And without further ado, okay, anxiety disorders, they're the most prevalent psychiatric problem in the country. So if you know somebody, I'd be amazed if any of you on this webinar do not know somebody who has an anxiety condition. I know I can probably count more than both of my hands here in terms of the fingers. And about a third of Americans at some point will suffer an important anxiety condition during the course of their life. And it's situational. Part of it, some people, if you have more than one kid, many of you on the webinar do, you realize that the way the DNA mixes in meiosis, some of your kids are going to be more anxious than others. And I see it so clearly, it's amazing. It's like we made both of these kids and they're so different. One is the chillest kid in the world and one is pretty wound up and likes to control things and gets nervous. The other one just kind of floats along, and it's amazing from you and your spouse. Like, how do we make these different kids? But anxiety shows up, and for some, it shows up very early. Others, it's conditional. It depends upon the conditions in which they're in. And some of you may have experienced this when you were in school or at a tough part of work, or if there was a health crisis. You realize your coping skills get stressed and strained, and you might need to resource up at certain points. But I've seen this with kids show up, when they're a junior in high school. I've seen it show up once they're in college. I've seen it show up after college in the world of work. It can manifest at different times. And so for many people, it really is like the conditions, the environment, the water you're in affects that level of, can I regulate myself in these conditions? Yes. Here, my skills are inadequate. And then the whole thing is, how do I skill up? And I really do perceive of this self-regulation as a matter of skills. I don't, even like looking at anxiety conditions, do I need to medicate or not? Or is like, can I change the conditions? Can I change the environment way before I think about throwing molecules at this problem? Because I want someone to have skills that they're going to be able to use their whole life through, not just, learn that I need external molecules to manage myself. And that's, some people definitely do, but if I can use inner resources first, I will always go there first. So anxious high school kids very frequently become anxious college kids. Not surprising. And there are a lot of anxious college kids. There's a lot more depression, anxiety, alienation in college these days. I have friends of mine who I graduated with in my counseling program who are working on the college level in colleges, and their dance cards are full. Their schedules are booked, and so many more kids now. And there's less stigma about going for getting help for anxiety and depression. So the counseling offices are full in many cases, and they're having to hire, and they're trying to, I don't know if we're minting enough counselors for the current demand. And my brother's also, he's a counselor, he's a trained social worker, and I hear, stories from him as well in terms of what he sees in his student base and so forth. But 59% of students last year said they are currently dealing with anxiety. Pause for a second and think about that. Think about when you were in college. I was in the college 94 on, and that number, it was not 5 out of 10 kids were anxious. That things were different. Times really have changed, and there's more of an acceptance of it, but also just the perceptions about with work and technology and the pandemic. There are many things that have happened to make this generation more anxious. So we know this is a high level. There's been a decline in teen mental health over the last 10, 15 years. There's more anxiety. There is more depression. Unfortunately, there's more suicide. I've actually seen that directly. Students and friends of my students. Anxiety is a big topic for parents, for school teachers, educators, clinicians. So this is the fact that there are people on this and they're more watching tomorrow the next day isn't surprising. It's really a big deal. One of my colleagues, Gary Glass, he is one of the counselors over at Emory. And I did actually a year interning on getting my counseling master's over at the Emory Career Counseling Center. And I, became in contact with a lot of great therapists and counselors over there. And his framing of this, I thought, was really useful, that looking at the isolation, my kid, what's wrong with my son, my daughter, versus what's wrong with the environment, what's wrong with the water, what's wrong with the peer group. Like, is it just my kid is struggling, or is there more? And I really like the framing of this because the system is honestly a big part of it. Now, there are stressors all over the place. Social media, there are external challenges, environmental crises they're facing, getting into college. Many of the colleges that we got into, our kids might not get into. When I applied to Penn, it was about 3 in 10 kids got in. Now it's more like 6 out of 100. It's a very different calculus. So there's more pressure. College costs more. And AI, there are times I admit that I go down AI rabbit holes and I get nervous having small children and wondering the world of work and where it's all going. And my brother, as a therapist, talks me down sometimes. It helps me regulate myself. And one thing that is a true fact, that other human beings keep us sane. Other human beings keep us grounded. And that network of people is essential. And it's really important that your child, if they have anxiety, they cultivate some really good friendships. Honesty, vulnerability, showing up for each other, and not on a screen, but actually human to human, seeing a friend, talking things through. It really helps us ground ourselves. And without it, we can ratchet up our anxiety. I saw people during the pandemic. One of my good buddies, his daughter got really wound up and really worked up. And then, there's anxiety and depression, neurotic behaviors. But when you don't have your friend group, things can really escalate. And so friends keep us sane. That's one thing. And brothers, if they have skills and so forth, and partners and spouses. All right. So the pressures on our kids today are greater. The level of scheduling, if you're listening to this, you look at your kids' schedules in years when you were younger, and in many cases, the kids today have more structured time, overscheduled. Also, there's more homework for many kids than there used to be. Some of us went to very, intense high schools, but I see that more kids, like I took 7 APs total in my high school career. I have some of our students are taking 13, 14. So it's just a different level of academic load. And there's pressure to excel starting earlier. And I'm trying to protect my own kids and looking at there's a really great school here in DeKalb County, one of the top ones in the state. But the kids, starting in six, when they're like 6, 7, 8 years old, they're getting hours and hours of homework a night. It's like, do I want my kid to experience that or have a more open, loose childhood? But a lot of kids, they're experiencing a lot of intensity very early, very young. So we're definitely asking more of our kids. Often there's a mismatch of brain development where they are with self-regulation and just all the information coming at them. And they're stressful trying to sort things out, especially, in the age of, with AI and social media, like, even navigating what's true, what's not true. We're having to allocate more resources as AI gets better, video creation gets better. Like what's real becomes a whole different thing. So everybody is a little more anxious, and not just because of politics, which is definitely part of it, but also economic uncertainty, looking at, where's our country going? There are a lot of things geopolitically going on that are stressful. And sometimes our kids can see it, they can sense it, even in our conversations. I have little kids, but sometimes I don't, guard myself enough, and my kids start picking up on things. So there are things that are definitely challenging, and we have a media cycle that is just relentless. And some of you have put yourselves on media fasts, and I used to spend half an hour to an hour every morning updating news. Now I really manage that better. My wife and I used to always wake up and we'd watch the Morning Joe or Meet the Press on Sundays, and now it's like we're trying to manage how much we feed ourselves because it's constant, and that can definitely keep anxiety ticking. I remember my grandmother back when she would just watch Fox News and for 3 hours a day, and she'd get terrified, didn't want to leave her house. And it's like, Bubby, you have to really stream back, turn back the media because it's definitely affecting your mental health. But Gary, this is my buddy again. He talked about our language and how we frame things, and part of it is understanding that being a human being, stress is just part of the experience of being alive in the material physical world. We're going to have stress, and if we don't have stress, we actually can't achieve our best. We can't rise to our full potential. It's important to have stress in life, and without enough stress, it's not good for us, and we actually languish and don't thrive. But then there is too much stress. Like some worry, normal, totally normal. You have issues, problems, things coming up, a health thing, whatever. Some worry is natural. It leads you to act in many cases to, do something about it. But then anxiety, some fear of the future, the whole thing is when it becomes crippling. So I like framing it. I'm having some stress, I'm having some worry versus I'm having some anxiety because that really is a clinical condition. And now, it's become so accepted and so non-stigmatized that we bandied about. But often, like, we're pathologizing something which is just a normal level of stress. I have some fear, some worry. It's not full-on anxiety. But this is just a matter of, how do we frame it? Language does matter. So anxiety, in the clinical sense, if I show you the DSM, it's an abnormal sense of fear. It's, excessive apprehension about the future. And I was talking to a buddy of mine earlier today who has anxiety. He's working on, self-regulation, and he's like me, 50, and dealing with things and how it's showing up in his body and digestion and sleep, and learning how to calm ourselves down, learning with the vagus nerve and breathing. And one of those things which struck me this morning from our talk, it's like you're being thrown constantly out of the present. And anxiety isn't the future. It's fear of, I can't control things in the future, what's coming. Or going back to the past and ruminating, often it's depression and regret and remorse and so forth. But we get taken out of the present. And one of the most important things with mindfulness and many meditations and breathing is getting back in the moment, where we have some control, some agency, and it's not, my fears are way in the future. So stress, let's define terms. Normal. It's a healthy reaction. Stress is part of being alive. And there's going to be some stress when there's some kind of threat, small, big. Anxiety, the threat is living in the future. And when you feel afraid, you start thinking more about the future. And then often you go into this cascade of this might happen, then this might happen. And then all of a sudden you're off to the races. And you feel less and less agent and less empowered as you're going down this fear spiral, which being alive, we've all experienced that at some level around something, whether it's our finances, our marriage, our physical health, the health of someone we love. There's a fear spiral which can take off, and that's part of it. There's about 100+ years old. This curve is called the Yerkes-Dodson curve. If you live in Atlanta, the Yerkes is the center. It's for primates here at Emory, and we tracking this in terms of performance. And some stress, good, and actually the right level of stress we call eustress. EU, the good, euphemism, EU is a good thing, it's positive. But then we go too much stress and that becomes distress. That's when our structures begin to give way. That's when our skills, our self-regulatory skills, our coping skills start to decline. And we get tied into this excessive rumination and we lose our sense of what we can do, our agency, our self-efficacy. So some stress, and there are times I have kids who are not stressed enough. You might have a kid like that. They're so happy-go-lucky. It's like, you need to be a little bit worried about this grade or this test, and there's a little bit of fear. Where none, I need to stimulate you a little bit, but too much, then performance tanks. So there's always the golden mean, riding that perfect spot for humans. So if you perceive of something as a threat, this might really hurt me. That's where anxiety can really pick up. And there's something of this is a challenge. I'm a little worried about my performance versus, I perceive like, this thing really could do some damage. And suddenly you start getting, fear, potentially anxiety. But the way we frame things can change. And in psychology and counseling, one of the most important tools with cognitive psychology and is CBT. It's the cognitive reframe, the way you take your thoughts about something and you pivot and shift them. You can't change the environment, like William James. Your thoughts about that. That's what's in our power. How we think about, how we frame something. That's a huge piece of it. So again, it's important that when your kids they come to you, I'm worried, I'm stressed. Like that's normal. That's perfectly healthy. You can, and a great thing is to normalize that for them and share with you. Yeah, I feel stressed. I feel nervous about certain things. That's part of being human. And some stress hormones helps with focus. We actually need a little bit before a test, a little bit of cortisol is your buddy. That stress hormone, does, but too much stress, too much cortisol, not good. So we can't vilify cortisol, but a little bit of it, when you wake up in the morning, cortisol level gets you up, gets you moving. And there's a little epinephrine, the neurochemistry, we need some stress. And again, without any, not good. So low level can accelerate problem solving and planning and thinking about one thing I love to do. I've grown a business for over decades. It's like you plan things out for the year. What are our budgets? What are our goals? What might go wrong? What are things, you start, the pre-autopsy, what went wrong if we missed our goals, our strategies, our objectives. And so thinking about some stress is actually helpful to even bring it in, like why failure might happen. And you may experience a little bit of repetitive, thoughts, a little cycling. We all do it. It's okay. You can still lead to productive action with that. And there are ways to manage if it gets too much in terms of, we'll talk about writing things down and other things. And you can always use self-care, self-calming, relaxation to bring yourself back to center and maintain performance if you are having a little bit too much stress. So again, we're all living on this curve. Every day we have some level of stress, maybe stressed out by your neighbor, by whatever it is, by someone in traffic. Someone made some joke, like I think it was Louis C.K. We get into our cars, and that's when everything changes in terms of our perceptions, our level of emotional regulation once we're driving. And I definitely feel some stress driving in Atlanta traffic. Many of you live in big cities where, we definitely, stress is part of sometimes the commute and so forth. So too much fear, maladaptive, because when you get too into your amygdala, that deactivates the problem-solving centers more in the prefrontal, preorbital cortex. This is where we solve problems, our executive functioning centers. If we get too into the limbic, the hindbrain, the amygdala, we don't solve problems as well. We don't trust ourselves, and we start imagining, these threats emerging. So too much fear, no good. So, and some of you, your kids or you personally, you have, experienced clinical level anxiety. So if you may experience medication, where it affects functioning, it affects your ability to get things done. It affects your physiology, affects your body. Academically, things start shifting socially. And one of the things I look for, I have colleagues who are therapists look for, it's what's up with your well-being. I have a close person, in my, like, are you showering? How is your sleep? When things get really jacked up with sleep and diet, hygiene, dress, like, oh, that's when we're getting to some kind of level of functional impairment. So these little tells that things are really off the rails in some way. And so again, we're looking for an anxiety disorder, which is an impairment in function. So this is an interesting question. If I were to ask you, just take a second in your thought in your mind, what's the opposite of control? You think for a second. Lack of control. But one framing I like is the opposite of having control is having trust. And that's, it could be chaos versus I trust things are gonna unfold in an okay way. And one of the biggest things we can teach our young people is learning how to have trust. And it's when you're a kid, I mean, if you can get back in the mindset of your children, you can help them. I feel like my kid is still, I can scratch and he's still there. I still remember my 10-year-old self, my 12-year-old self. I remember some of the fears and even some of the anxieties socially, or asking a girl out on a date, or being laughed at, or humiliation, and I remember, like, oh, you think the world is over and you don't have enough context. And part of it at 40, at 50, we have a much broader context. But, learning how to trust things, which, having gone through enough small crises, you realize things do tend to be okay and work out in the end. You learn how to trust life more. But when you're young, you don't have the years of experience. And often you are just perceiving, oh God, it's all going to fall apart. And I definitely can relate to that when kids feel that way. And so learning how to, getting towards trust. Have you had experiences where things did come out okay? And what I see is people have anxiety, often they move towards control. And that's very common. I see that sometimes with one of my little ones. And I want to control everything. And like, this is an anxiety thing. If I can control everything, then I don't have to have the fear. Rather than manage my anxiety, I'm going to manage the world. And that's a tough act. And that carries with it. That's a pretty challenging thing for people around you and for yourself, because it's very hard to control others and to control your environment in that way. So part of it's learning how to trust. I have a good buddy who's, in 12 steps for 40 years. He's all about letting go of the trapeze. That's his metaphor of, like, trusting and finding that things do work out. And that's his centering, calming thing versus trying to control and trying to white knuckle, or trying to, move life towards what you want, versus learning how to go with it, flow with it better. And so that's a big thing for lowering anxiety, is that shift towards trust. Parents, what can you do? Why are you on the webinar? Well, first is, the framing of it is helpful. Maybe you've got something from this already that's useful for your kids, but there are definitely tools for you guys. And all parents, we grapple with the dilemma of, do we assist or step back? Again and again. And honestly, you're going to go through this even when your kids are 50. And a parent's trying to figure out, do I throw in some money financially? Do I help? This is something, when you have children, you're in this dilemma for the rest of your life, essentially. Because when your kids are stressed or having a hard time, typically so are you, for most parents, the parents I work with. And so, do I grant them autonomy, give them space, let them have a little bit of stress, a little bit of pain, or do I intervene? And it depends on every circumstance. And part of it, and sometimes the answer is jump in there, help out. Sometimes the answer is step back, make distance. This is a lesson. So I like, the importance of looking at how your kids are managing. And some of them, they're going to be experimenting. Kids are always experimenting. And sometimes they try an intervention that's not very good. One of my therapist friends had a practice in Buckhead, catering to these big schools in Atlanta. And about, almost all of her practice, so many kids were cutting, doing self-harm, had anxiety, eating disorders, binge, using substances, binge drinking. And they were trying some pretty harmful things. But she was amazed how much cutting there was among her female population. And it's like, if I then I bring out some endorphins and pain management, and then I feel better, versus let me learn how to regulate myself. And kids will try stuff. One of my first students, I think it was 2001. His parents are going through, now he's probably over 40. But he was talking about his grades, his parents going through a tough divorce. And he showed me his arm, and he showed me where he was putting out cigarettes on his arm. And I was like, whoa, okay. And I was, my mid-20s. I actually didn't know what to tell him. And that's actually got me to go back to get a degree in counseling, because I didn't realize I didn't know how to help this kid. But kids try stuff to manage their emotions, which they're not very skilled with yet. And they may have a limited range. They may talk to their peers. What do you do? They may look to parents. They may look to social media, trying to figure out, how do I manage these feelings I'm having? In the event you have a teen in crisis, which happens, and I've seen it, work with people, you may need urgent measures. You may need to go and find a space where they're going to be able to heal, get skills. I've seen outpatient, I've seen inpatient. But sometimes, when it really gets intense and they're falling apart, you got to help them and support them. I've seen wilderness therapy. There are definitely ways, if things are really in crisis, which you would know if everything's falling apart. And sometimes you go to a pediatrician, first line, talk to them, and they may ask some questions. They have training in this as well. And then there's a whole, the whole profession, social workers, counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists. There's a big range of people who can help if a kid's really having a hard time. One of the most foundational pieces is cognitive behavioral therapy, the intersection of our thoughts, our feelings, and behaviors, which again, a lot of these interventions fall in the domain of cognitive behavioral. That was my training. There's also someone who I love her work, Marsha Linehan, psychologist who actually herself suffered from something called borderline personality disorder. But she really stressed this thing called distress tolerance, which I love, the framing of this, of learning how to internally tolerate some discomfort without reaching for something potentially harmful to close it down. And this is the essence of self-regulation. How do I manage? How do I tolerate some level of distress and without needing to short circuit it? And then understanding what triggers, what conditions led to this discomfort. How do I soothe myself? How do I ground myself? And in her, in this case, like before I do something harmful to myself or others, and learning, but it's often the framing, the diagnosis of what happened when things do fall apart. Then you trace it back to the trigger, and that's very helpful. The stress tolerance is huge in adulthood. And, if people are doing destructive things, you might read a little bit or watch a video about Marsha Linehan. It's called dialectical behavioral therapy. There's cognitive behavioral, which is the basis of most therapy, but DBT is also very powerful at learning about how to be resilient, how to handle stressors. Talk to your kids. If they have anxiety, talk about their anxiety, some of the triggers they're experiencing, and if it's school related, yeah, there are times I've advised clients and students, let's scale back. One of the things I find is oftentimes kids are just going through too much, and not in every case. One of my students really stressed out, actually grades are suffering, was trying to work 20 hours a week, and he had friends working at this. There was like a pita place and there was a pizza joint, and it's like 20 hours a week. Like your grades aren't there, and now you're giving up 8 hours on your Saturday and your 4 hours on your Monday, so it's like, can we scale that back? Like, what's critical? What's important right now? What can be reduced? Because sometimes, getting back to the foundation, the fundamentals, takes away a little bit of stress off kids, and everything gets better. DBT again, Marsha Linehan, validation. When your kid comes to you and they're stressed, try to find what's valid. They may have some part of their phrasing, some part of their thing they're saying makes sense, is valid. Some part is totally invalid. Try to validate what is valid, and but help them feel like they're seen, they're attended to, without going to what's invalid. And validation, they're getting some affirmation from you, from an adult, that this is real, and that's a good thing. So again, searching for the valid, and you can invalidate the invalid, but make sure you're precise, and try not to shut them down if they're again, the affect, the emotion, what's going on here. They need to be seen by someone who cares about them. Some kids who have anxiety are channeling it directly through the genetic line from a parent or grandparent. I've seen this. There's definitely a line in my family going from my grandmother to mother to, there's a straight line. You can just trace it and draw it. Okay. Understanding the conditions which led to, and then looking at the grandmother, her mother, it's like there's a whole line. I go back to Europe and looking at some of these stressors. And so some of it is, okay, this is not just my kid making this up. There's genetically, this person's predisposed. And that's just, she has these alleles, and so be it. So then again, that isn't to say there's nothing to do. Not deterministically we're done, but now it's like, okay, I understand some of the, you aren't just inventing this. And so the family connection, apples fall from the apple trees. Anxious kid typically has someone in the family is anxious, not always, but sometimes. And one of the important things is parents who are dealing with anxious kids need to allocate some time to manage their own anxieties. They have to be better providers, better caregivers. You have to put on your oxygen mask first, do your own inner work, and your kids will benefit by you doing your work. It's one of those interesting things. I've seen this. I do some physical therapy things, and I was seeing a therapist, and it's like, I'm going to work on your left leg, and then boom, the right leg changes without doing anything. It's like, just by working on this other leg responds in kind, which is amazing to me, the way the brain works. But like when you do your work, it subconsciously or otherwise, you're affecting everyone in the family when you're doing your work and you're healing. So you can't nurture your child beyond what you are, yourself. So learning how to self-nurture. Everyone has their own pathway: music, certain sounds, certain places, walking in nature. Some people, it's sensory, taking a hot bath, a temperature thing. Some tea feels good, comfort foods, quiet spaces. Everyone has to figure out what makes them feel more grounded, more centered. And again, talk about when the kid says, I have anxiety, I fear, I'm nervous, talk about yours. And this is just part of it. And don't minimize it, but normalize it and share. Here's how it happens for me. You're not flawed, you're not broken. I get this too. Here's my story. That really helps kids feel better with sharing with that. And then coping skills. The way you show off coping skills matters. And, if they see you doing centering things, calming yourself, doing deep breathing, they're watching. And what you do matters more than what you say. Your kids are always observing behaviors through information, much more than listening to your language. So if you say, I need to take a walk right now, I need some, I do some self-care, I have a practice, your kids will pick up on that and you can share that with them. If, I like doing some, qigong, other things, like my kids will eventually learn. They're still pretty small, but I'll share that with them, see if that helps them anyway. There's a great book, Dan Siegel, brilliant fellow, who's written a bunch. He's really someone who channels the newest science and shares it with people. Mindside, pretty helpful book in my experience. And it's learning just a little bit about the brain regions. I threw out a few words earlier about the frontal cortex and the amygdala. It's pretty basic. Some folks say like I flipped my lid and I went from the front to the back. From there are lots of ways to frame it, but the amygdala is a threat seeker. I'm looking, I'm observing, I'm scanning for threats, and if that gets really ratcheted up, then there's a pituitary cortisol matrix, and suddenly the catecholamines flood. That affects your pulse, that affects your visual field changes. You lose some of your peripheral vision. When you get cortisol coursing through the body, you change the whole body. And then you start sending out some gamma aminobutyric acid, and it calms the amygdala down, less activation, less reactive, and then suddenly you get into a more relaxed state. So once you get back in the frontal cortex, things do relax on a chemical level, on the physical, emotional level. It all happens. So self-talk. Self-talk is one of the first things I address. I've worked with many kids over the years who have had anxiety, and it's your dialogue. Your inner dialogue sustains the anxiety, sustains the chemical changes, the things that are going through your head. Your self-talk is critical. And your critic, when you're being critical, and you could find a way to frame, oh, there you go again. That's the critic, or that, okay, gotcha. When you catch yourself really deep in critic or in that anxious, fearful place. And so part of it's just being attentive to that inner dialogue. When your kids might say things that are, massively overgeneralizing, black and white, it's going to be awful. It's going to being specific and helping, bring it down, helping them ground it. It's not going to be, it's Albert Ellis and Beck talked about like catastrophizing or awfulizing, saying whatever happened, like this is going to be the absolute worst. Like, you know what? Even if this person doesn't accept your invitation, it's going to be ultimately there'll be someone else. It's going to be okay. It's not the end of the world. And even if you get an F on this paper, it's not the end of the world, and we're going to move forward. And versus like this catastrophic thing that might happen or this cascade. Or I'm not going to get into the school. Like there are 2,500 four-year schools. Even if you don't get into this one, we're going to find you a great school. And trying to open up the lens, the possibilities to minimize anxiety. If it has to be this way or bust, that kind of thinking, that kind of rigid thinking fuels anxiety. Any kind of rigidity, you have to have, so again, the whole trust piece. And it may not be this school, but you're going to find a great school. It's going to be okay. It may not be this major. You may not get the score on this, but it's going to be, you're going to find a path. Shift them from dwelling so much on the externals. That can be anxiety inducing if they're always comparing themselves to others. And so the more you can bring it in about yourself, how you're doing compared to how you're doing before is always better, less anxiety producing. And so when you have the dichotomous thinking, I called it before rigid thinking, it doesn't have to be this exact outcome. That kind of thinking is very stressful. It's either this or it's everything is hell. It's like, oh man, you're in for some trouble. If the world has to conform to your wishes or everything's ruined, that's an anxiety kind of thing. And also catastrophizing, awfulizing, that was Albert Ellis. He also called it masturbating. It must be this way or, it'll be a catastrophe. And part of it, you spit in the soup is like, is it really like this end cup, the end of the world? And in most cases, no. But that's, this is anxious thinking. So your inner coach is your buddy. Your inner coach is helpful. And learning how to activate your inner coach, which I think lives in the frontal cortex, and it can help you, guide you, talk you down, give you positive messages. And, part of it, there are people who, when you're in stress, like, what do you tell yourself? Is it like, oh my God, it's going to be awful? Or is it going to be, it's going to be okay, it's going to work out? And it's funny when you're raising kids. I still have one of my kids. I have a 3-year-old, and whenever things, there's like messes or spill or like diapers, I kind of lose it. That's one area where my self-regulation is not great. Many other areas, I trust things are going to be fine, things are okay. But I really get activated, and I always try to, can I manage that better? Because my kids won't freak out when they see me freaking out, and because they're looking for me for the reaction, and trying to get myself more calm, to be there's a phrase I love, to be the less anxious presence. And I love that phrase, and that's something I aspire towards. There was um, I think it was a religious person, like a clergyman, who had that. It's like 20 years ago, and then some people picked it up. But can I become the less anxious presence for my family? And whatever I model for them is important. And so again, it's the self work which helps your kids. If they have anxiety things, you got to watch what you're saying, how you're showing up for them. Giving your kids mastery experiences. This is Albert Bandura, one of the giants in cognitive science. He was out at Stanford. And the name of the game is kids are nervous. He framed it in terms of like you're nervous because you believe your own abilities, your powers aren't up to the task. And how do you increase your self-perception of your self-efficacy, your ability to accomplish and act on the world is through mastery experiences. And you learn some through watching other people, their social learning. You learn some, with feedback in your body. You learn some from people giving you reinforcement. But the most powerful way for you to shift your self-belief system is having had experiences of mastery. And so sometimes you give your kids a stressor and it's too much, they fall apart. Can I reduce the stressor where they can achieve some success? If I can give them some success, some feeling of mastery, they begin to feel more confident, more comfortable, and less anxious. So giving kids success is critical, and parents can do that. They can architect things where this was too big of a challenge, let me ratchet it back. That mastery will build, the anxiety will decrease. Um, I also like the framing, some of this cognitive behavioral stuff of you have these thoughts, and sometimes you're swimming in thoughts. And one thing I love is pin it to the paper. Let me give it a name. Let me give this voice in my head a name. Let me even draw, if someone's inclined to draw this image. I've done this before. The critical voice. Let me actually give it. So when I have these thoughts, it's not, oh, geez, I'm being self-critical. It's, oh, and you create some cognitive distance from those thoughts, and you separate yourself from them by giving this a presence of form and name. Yeah, this is really helpful. Oh, the worry beast. Oh, it's a worry the Murray. There you are again. Or oh, there you go. It's my shadow. Hi, and just showing up, doing your job, no problem. So the whole thing is, if you can name it, you can tame it. That's a framing of it. Versus when you feel like it's in you and you can't, it's squishy. It's like versus no, it's out there, and you're trying to. They kind of creates that separation, which is very powerful. Other domains of competence. Sometimes kids experience anxiety academically. And the name of the game is, have you experienced the ability to regulate your emotions in the other domain? And a very classic one is, people experience stress, pressure in non-academic domains. Sometimes it's performing domain, athletics. It could be they get up, they're a debate person, they're a extemporaneous speaker, they're in a school play, they perform. And well, do you feel anxiety? And most people do feel, some level of fear before they perform, which actually can get you to be really focused. And so you may ask them like, so before you had a big match, how did you manage yourself or your stress, your arousal? And some people say, well, I'd go for a run, or I need, the endorphins and the serotonin from exercise helps me manage. Or it's, I took a bath or I got good sleep, whatever it is. But ask them, you're looking for other strengths. And you may not have experienced yourself strong in this domain, but if I can pull from this domain, boom, I poured it over, do a horizontal transfer, and then suddenly I have some more resources in this domain. Very powerful. The body. I'm a big believer that the body, I mean, it's all connected. The body, the mind, the emotions, it's all one big system. And you can approach it through any of these different centers. You can approach it through the body, you can approach it through your feelings, you can approach it through your thoughts. One simple thing that I don't understand fully how meridians work. I get acupuncture. I don't understand how that works. But I trust that after several thousand years, they figured something out about how systems are all connected. And there is actual research on this. They've done controlled studies, double-blind, randomized controls, where they give people certain interventions. They give some people this tapping, and they've shown that the ability to decrease levels of anxiety and decrease levels of PTSD gains beyond other relaxation, other things. And so the tapping is very simple. Take a second, look at this grid, and all you're doing is like there's a whole thing where you tap your hand, then you tap these points, the side of your eyebrow, like the inside, like you just tap these points, one or two sides, outside of your eye, 7 times, under the eye, 7 times, under your nose, 7 times. If you have a second, do this right now. It's kind of funny, but I've seen Olympic athletes doing this. The collarbone 7 times, under the arm 7 times. And there's something about the repetitive touch, and there's something about potentially in these meridian, these points where it is relaxing. And I don't understand it. My mind is always like, how is this working? I have no idea. But all I know is this is helpful, and it's free, and it takes a few seconds. There is something about human touch and afferent nerves and relaxation, in a few slides, that mammals respond to touch, and that's just how mammals are structured. There's also a thing that regulating your breathing. We know that you may have heard of the vagus nerve at this point. The vagal theory is getting popular, and there's been, for years and years and years, we know that if we start doing deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, it begins to stimulate the vagus nerve, and that goes up to the brain. It's because the vagus is the wandering, is the longest nerve, and it gives feedback, and it's calming. It actually, when you activate the vagus nerve through that calming kind of rhythm, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system. That does slow your heart rate. That does lower your blood pressure, and it's clinical. We can measure it, and so it does kick off the body's relaxation response, deep, slow diaphragm breathing. So we can teach kids how to do this. Very helpful. And you can stop. You can show them, and you can do the box breathing. You can do the hold, or breathing out longer than you breathe in. And then the diaphragm. Make sure your kids see the diaphragm going in and out, not just like the chest. The diaphragm's moving. And then mindfulness, relaxation, calming yourself, a quiet place, and taking a pause. Pauses can really help us ground ourselves when we're really worked up. And being outside is really beneficial too. And there are meditations, there are many apps. I did Waking Up app for a couple of years, and now I kind of just do my own thing. And I've been meditating on and off for decades, yoga classes and whatnot. And so encourage anything contemplative, whether it's yoga, whether it's qigong, meditation, sitting in silence. These things are all beneficial, and you can learn this. And kids who have real anxiety, issues, doing something physical, often from the Eastern traditions, can be very helpful. Tai Chi, yoga, qigong, pretty basic stuff. The body. I mentioned before that some kids have to go for a run because, again, exercise, even 30 minutes exercise 3 times a week, can lower anxiety clinically, because it boosts endorphins, endogenous morphine, lowers pain. It can increase dopamine and serotonin, and it also suppresses cortisol. So exercise is real, and there are people, and it also helps manage addiction. It also helps. There's so many things that exercise does, and we're not getting enough of it. It affects our mental state as well as our physical state. So exercise is really, really critical, and cardiovascular exercise, especially for kids who have anxiety. And some kids need to go for a run, and they feel better afterwards. Some adults need to go for a run. I know several in their 40s, and it helps them manage their stress, their depression. Like, exercise matters. And sleep is critical to manage anxiety. And if you don't get enough sleep, you have more of a hair trigger response. Sleep is critical for memory formation. It's also critical for emotional regulation. So that sleep is absolutely fundamental. Nature is a friend. Pictures of nature, sounds of nature, walking in nature, that diffusion of focus. And there's something, I've heard that people, when you see the ocean, anything where you can't have a specific tight focus is apparently relaxing to the brain. And so looking at the sea, looking at the sky, it's a very diffuse, open focus, is calming. It's very helpful. Human connection is one of the, if you've ever raised children, when your kids got scared, they're upset when they're younger, you calm them, you do a slow stroking pattern, and that activates oxytocin, which is also, it limits the cortisol and it makes the amygdala less reactive. So human touch, and this is not just a human thing, it's a mammal thing. With dogs, when little mice get scared, their mothers lick them and groom them repeatedly in this pattern, and it calms down and lowers the levels of cortisol. You can measure it with spit tests. The cortisol comes down, and oxytocin also is released. So beneficial things there. Your diet matters. Healthy foods, a bunch of sugar, getting on the crash with the insulin, and nice slow burning protein, slower carbohydrates, and hydration. Also very, very critical. these things. There's one thing here that's tied to touch. Again, it's one of the freebies. Like I showed you the emotional freedom technique called tapping. This one, another of my counseling buddies showed me this one. And type in the word havening into Google, and there's a bunch of videos. And this, again, taps into that repetitive, the afferent nerve, which sends feedback. The slow, like the havening of the face, you do this about 5, 6 times. They can go to the bathroom, do this, go to whatever, take a minute, rubbing your palms together repetitively. And the one I like the most myself, is like a self hug. Go back and forth, kind of go in, kind of loop with your arms, and it starts triggering some things. It gives your brain certain signals. When your kids get scared, remember how you used to calm them with, and then this, it's like a self-soothing technique, very powerful, very helpful. Um, there is also a company, their agency, nonprofit, they call the Heart Math Institute. And I learned about them some 20 years ago. And I have a few little of their devices, but it's all about learning how to get into this nice sinus rhythm using like biofeedback. One thing they also do is like just putting their hand on their chest and imagining you're breathing in through your heart. And again, it's just using your brain, your imagination, but that can be calming too. Like the feedback, or putting your hand on your heart, thinking about someone you love, thinking about something you appreciate, thinking about, a place you love, a person you love. And even that, activating that thought pattern with a little bit of human, physical touch can be calming and grounding. So again, these are all techniques to learn, which apply to academics and apply to everything. It's all the same. Self-regulation is a lifelong journey. Over the years, when I would go and give a big lecture in front of a huge room, I would like to have a crystal in my hand. I still have some around me, certain stones, certain rocks. I could hold them, and that would be, people used to do rosary things. But having a physical object in your hand to hold can be grounding for some, and that can help you manage. These people have, like, a necklace, a talisman, a chain, a cross, a thing, whatever it is. Physical objects, don't discount that. The physical and then the emotional are connected. And then I spent years learning about Carl Jung. Love his modality of healing and thinking about the psyche, and the idea of using these images. He called them archetypes, like the king or the wise elder, the Senex, someone inside of you who is more centered than you are. That he talked about, the little s self and the big S self. There's something inside of you, even which is more advanced, and trying to activate, call it in, trying to bring in your wiser self. I was very involved in this therapeutic group called STAR. We talked about the wise adult. Can I call in, if my kid's activated, I'm in my, wounded kid, can I bring in my wise adult? And so it's using that imagery, which is a psychological construct, to bring that in to calm down the body. So the inner coach, some people, they try to activate some, higher power, some religious figure, whatever it is, the king, the queen, and bring it in and imagine them. Journaling, simple. Writing things down, getting out of this ruminative process. Let me write down, I'm anxious about this grade. I'm anxious about failing my class. I'm anxious about not doing well on this test, the SAT, whatever it is. Journaling. And not for other people. It's not, I'm writing for validation from my peers on Facebook that's not for kids anymore, but on Snapchat or Instagram or whatever else they're using these days. I'm doing it, TikTok, who knows. But in the grand scheme, you're writing about your feelings. I'm nervous about screwing up if I get stuck. And that lowers the rumination. Taking 10 minutes to write, and also enhances performance. This is Ramirez and the current president at Brown. No, I'm sorry, Dartmouth. She was a researcher. I used to love her stuff. I have her books on my choke. Anyhow, this stuff is researched clinically, and journaling does work. Then too much news for many of us can make us nervous. Getting too much sources. Be careful of YouTube, taking internet breaks, these kind of things. And then the last, reducing the amount of things on your plate, balancing priorities. Kids are, social life, time with physical health. There's often a lot going on. And the question is, you need to have a certain balance to keep your anxiety at bay. If you get out of balance, typically people feel more nervous, more fear, more stress. If they lose their balance of their body, their health, their, taking care of yourself, you start feeling off. And so if you're totally focused on performance, there's more pressure, more comparison, there's more eating disorders. So you gotta be careful about too much focus on performance. I have to get this grade, this performance. all those muster things versus can I scale back some? Can I drop from this AP? And typically, whenever you drop down from an AP to on level, it's like sigh of relief. I've seen so many kids get so worked up, and then I can breathe again because I like lost 5 hours of homework a week doing that AP. So barriers to health, kids are overscheduled, not getting sleep, stresses and so forth, too much technology, too much social media use. You have to manage that too for manage anxiety. So reduce the amount of stuff. Can I decrease from the schedule? Can I cut some activities that aren't essential? Can I, is there, can I find a way to up joy and decrease things that seem like they're a burden? And can I help my child restore balance? That can often help reduce anxiety academically and otherwise. And then helping them structure things. Our kids need to socialize. And I want to make sure that we're reinforcing and validating the connections. Some people, they're hyper social and everything is, but some kids, they need to be hanging out with their friends. Our friends are our lifelines, our friends, and learning how to go to our friends when they're 15, 16, 17, so they'll do it when they're 21 in college and they're feeling, and when they're 23 and 25, learning that friends are essential because they keep us sane and we need good friendships. So encourage those relationships that feed and nourish our kids. And for you too, all of us, we need our friendships. I talked to my sister in DC. She's 53. It's like we need to invest in our friendships for our networks to keep us healthy and sane, so forth. And then helping your kids find things they love to do. If there's the academics or one piece of it, performance, but then what feeds you? If it's drawing, if it's music, if whatever it is, if it's cooking, help them, have some reflection and any ember of excitement that they love this thing. Give them time for the thing they love, and that's to maintain that balance. And also broaden the definition of success. It's not just this specific, I need this GPA, I need to get this score, I need to go to this school, this career track. It's like loosening up, and everything has to be perfect. Angela Duckworth, also very good researcher out of Penn, worked with Marty Seligman for years. She called these kids fragile perfects. Everything has to be absolutely perfect. But then if anything goes wrong, they can often collapse. They're the ones going to the counseling centers. They have major problems with emotional regulation. So too much focus on performance is not great for our kids. It takes away some part of their adolescence and healthy development. So shifting it towards relationships, engagement, intimacy, vulnerability, honesty, less stress and less performance. The more our kids feel they have to perform or perform a brand or advertise to the world that they're great and it's all together, that's not it's not authentic, it's not real. And that causes stressor and pressure, and especially pressure on academics. If I have to perform or else I'm less than. So how am I doing time? Wow, this is a long thing. I'm almost done, but a couple more slides. Technology. This is everyone has probably read Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, and I believe there's something to this. Just too much, use of the internet, too much use of social media, potentially. If it's squeezing out other activities, there definitely is too much time. Make sure it's not squeezing out exercise, sleep, other things, relationships, friendships. And then strong friendships, I've mentioned a few times, they're critical. Friendships can reduce anxiety and encourage, this development. And oh, there we go. And so that's it. So Applerouth, we live in this world between human connection, learning science. And I think that's the end. Let's go ahead and launch the final poll if you have any questions about things. And we're going to go to a Q&A because that is the end of my deck. And so these are the things that we do at Applerouth. We help kids with academics, testing, APs, executive functioning support. And then if you want any contact, let us know. All right, and then I'm going to close this out and I'm going to open up my Q&A window because I want to see if you have questions. And I definitely hope you do because it's always fun when there's interaction with the audience. Otherwise, I'm just talking to my screen, which I do a lot, but even so, it's more fun if there's interaction. So what do you got? What are any questions or things I might be able to be helpful with? And there may not be any, which is okay. We have 6 minutes, 5 minutes till we wrap. And if not, it's all right. I'll give you another minute. No. How do I help my child believe me? That's great. I mean, so one thing I found that you're not just pitching You're not trying to sell them or trying to manipulate them. Is sharing your story in a very real, authentic, vulnerable way. When in my experience, when I show you, when I'm really vulnerable with you and I'm honest, I step into the circle and I hear here are my scars, here are my wounds, here's a story and how I dealt with this and how things fell apart. Your kids need to hear that. Their kids need to know that what they're experiencing is, is okay, is normal. It's part of the human condition, and they're part of, it happened to me. It's like, oh, because they're looking at you and how you got yourself through hard situations. So to believe you, I think if you lead with vulnerability, and it's like, I just, I know I've had really tough times. I see you're going through some tough times. Here are some things I've learned, and take it or leave it. But this is how I found it. Everyone's going to find a way. And part of it also understanding that there are, I threw at you like 15, 20 different modalities. What worked for you might not work for your kid. They also have your spouse's DNA, and you're both of your parents, and all the four grandparents are feeding in. So maybe they need something different. They may, be more benefiting from more physical stuff or more, calming or more nature, whatever. We all need different things, but just show them there's a wide array, and everyone has to find a way to manage themselves. But I think leading with vulnerability and honesty and your stories may help them believe you more. Okay. I've got an eighth grader who was already very anxious about his grades and is very high performing. He's developed a blinking issue. Yep. That's almost a compulsion that seems to be getting worse. Any tips before high school? Thanks for a great presentation. Thank you. So yeah. It's a nervous tick. And the body, there's so many books. Body-centered therapy, the body keeps the score, and there's so many things. The way communication happens through the body, and the compulsive, the nervous blinking, it is telling you. Often I look for a foot that's tapping. Often it's like a repetitive motion that's kind of a tick, and it could be a facial thing. It could be a foot. It could be a tightening, and I did this in training in Hakomi therapy, and you actually ask the question, like you actually interact with a dialogue with what's that foot saying, or what's that blink? If I were to slow them down enough, like what's that eye telling? Like what if that eye could talk, what would that? What message would the eye say? If a person is even attentive at all to that channel, because they're communicating through that channel. There's verbal channels and nonverbal channels, and that visual, the eye, the blinking is a nonverbal channel, and so part of it is the level of not making him hyper self-conscious, but it's like it seems like there's a level of being wound up, a level of tension. Like, do you feel any tension in your body? Do you feel, because sometimes it comes out through some part, through a hand, a foot, a thing, a nervous action, versus like when they're really relaxed, that blinking will probably slow down. That level of activation, that level of speed, waveforms, and it's our brain waves. If you learn a little bit, with beta waves, alpha waves, theta waves, delta waves, as there's more activation, like the waveform changes, and the speed of as we get more relaxed, you want to go down to alpha, and then if you can get, theta is like super slow. But learning ways of calming ourselves to slow down that rhythm, and so that speed of that blink tells me something what's happening. Probably the speed of the thinking, and the emotional. Like there's a lot going on in there, and so helping your son develop things that help him calm down, whatever it is, whether it's exercise, sports, activity, like but finding a way, and having the dialogue. Like, are you aware? Like right now, I noticed something. When I share that I noticed like there's the blinking, maybe he's aware. But it seems like that happens when there's a lot of activation, a lot of arousal, a lot going on. And are there times in your day when you feel less or more centered, more, and what is it? And have a dialogue and encourage, like, I've for myself, here's how I slow things down when my wave is getting pretty quick. And maybe he'll be able to hear that about, again, you're sharing what works for you. He becomes more reflective about maybe other things I can do to calm myself down. And but I think this dialogue, it should be a now conversation, because eighth grade, it's going to get more intense, as you know. Ninth, 10th, like 11th grade, it gets really intense. So learning how to get some skills in place now before it gets really ratcheted up, I think is really beneficial. So starting that dialogue now. How do you know what's age appropriate executive functioning struggles? Ninth grade versus something going on like ADHD. Well, yeah, the executive functioning is going to develop. Sometimes kids in ninth grade, just give them 2 years, they're going to be a lot better in 11th. And then they'll be even better when they're in college, because by the time they're 25, they're fully cooked. Boys are delayed from girls typically with EF skills. The brain, we have different rates, and different people have different rates of maturation at different parts of the brain. So, I mean, age appropriate EF skills, the part of it is, are they functioning, or is it things are really falling apart? They're forgetting so much. Um, and if you're really curious, I mean, psychological intervention, the psyche evals aren't cheap, but they can be very powerful. They're like $3,000. And sometimes a school does it if you're in a public school, if they have the resources for the school counseling. There is a way to, diagnosing this kid have ADHD. But I think a lot of it, your kids, naturally, they're going to be forgetting some things naturally, looking at their book bag, is it a mess? Are they, but then I think the grades are telling if they're in collapse, if they're getting C's and D's, and they're really, really wicked bright, this may be an EF issue, not an intelligence issue. So I think looking at the potential and maybe the IQ if you're going to be testing, and then the performance, if there's a massive gap, this may be an EF skills thing. And you can coach that. Like we do coaching, trying to help kids learn how to use skills, how to stay on top of things when they're struggling. What are some strategies for avoiding excessive comparisons to others? And girls do this more than boys. Girls are aware of the hierarchy, the grades, the test scores. I've seen this. Some boys are very, very tuned in, but I've seen this more females on average. I'm looking globally, some difference in gender. And part of it is talking about just, the comparisons to others is just by its nature. And social media just is hell for that. When you feel like, your life isn't as good, isn't as exciting, isn't as blank as, because now you're seeing it. When you're hanging out by yourself before you're hanging out, now suddenly it's like getting feedback from these people with their perfectly curated things and curated selves. And it's like, oh my God, it's awful. Awful for kids. So much comparison. So part of it, what I love is journaling. I love anything which takes you away from performance back to self and introspection, knowing yourself, slowing things down. And being honest about the more you focus on externally, the often it's the worse you feel. And part of it, a lot of this is BS. People are using filters. People are just being very selective what they share and don't share. People are, with grades, with grades, there's always going to be someone smarter than you. And as you go up the ranks with college or grad school and, learning how you compare yourself to yourself and just sharing that and trying to talk that through, that these comparisons are just going to ratchet up anxiety versus focus on, your progress, that you do better than your previous test. How are you doing relative, to your past performance? And less trying talking to them like, yeah, Sarah got an A plus an AP, but comp sci, but that's Sarah, and you can learn from her, emulate her, admire her. But in terms of shaming yourself for not being where Sarah is, that's not helpful, and that's going to make you feel worse about yourself, and that ultimately is not going to serve you. So part of it is just reframing it, trying to bring them back to self-comparison, which is always better. How effective are those $3,000 psych evals? They're effective. I mean, they're very powerful. I think you learn what you're good at, where your strengths are, where you're not so strong. They can diagnose ADHD, other issues, processing speed. It's a nice report, 15, 20-page report, and you really do get a sense of, okay, wow, I'm actually pretty good here. My reading skills are here, my math skills are here, my comprehension's here, my processing speed is here. They will tell you essentially, if you have executive functioning challenges or if you have ADHD, these things are good diagnostic tools. They're going to give you a nice IQ score. I mean, I like these. I wish they were free. I think everyone could benefit from getting an eval, a neuropsych, is because you learn about your brain. And kids who learn about how they think, how they function, how they work, it's a nice thing to have. But the price can be prohibitive. But I've seen benefit, and I've read many of these. I did some training in school on these, my ed psych classes. But I do think there is real value, and we do work with people who do administer these. So yeah, I think there's value, especially if you're wondering why your grade's falling off or my kids seem super stressed, what's going on. When you start seeing problems or functional impairments or they're really stressed or really struggling, that's when I would consider it as a worthy investment. If they're coming along and things are great, but I need to spend $3,000, probably not. I'm curious, but it's more when a problem emerges or they seem like they're really having a hard time. Okay, 9:04. Well, everyone, thank you so much for coming out. Please feel free to share this. Have any questions, reach out to us. And everyone have a great night. All right, take care.